I heard the wine glass shatter before I heard my sister say the words that would change everything. It was a crystal flute, expensive, the kind my mother only brought out for special occasions. It hit the marble floor of the country club ballroom and exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces, and in that sudden silence, Claire's voice rang out clear and cold. At least my fiancé has a real career. Not like Emma, playing dress-up in her little office. The laughter started small. A few cousins. Then my Aunt Karen. Then the whole table to 23 people who were supposed to love me, all laughing at the girl who'd been invisible her entire life. I stood there in my simple black dress, holding a gift I'd spent 3 weeks choosing, and I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. That was the moment I stopped being the family doormat. That was the moment I decided they were going to learn exactly who Emma really was. Let me take you back, because you need to understand how we got here. My name is Emma Carson, and for 28 years, I was the shadow in my family's story. Claire was the son, 3 years younger, blonde, perfect, the daughter who could do no wrong. I was the older sister who somehow never measured up, no matter what I achieved. When I graduated top of my class from Stanford, my parents held a small dinner. When Claire got into a state college, they threw a party for 200 people. When I started working 16-hour days to build my career, they asked when I'd find time to settle down like Claire. When I bought my first car with money I'd saved, my father said, "Well, at least you're practical. If this hits home, tell me where you're watching from." Sometimes the hardest part isn't the betrayal, it's realizing you've been invisible all along. We lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, old money neighborhood, country club memberships, appearances that mattered more than truth. My father owned a regional manufacturing firm. My mother chaired charity boards. Claire worked in marketing at a mid-sized tech company and lived in a condo my parents bought her. Me? I left home at 22 with a business degree and a plan. I worked brutal hours in Seattle, then Chicago, climbing the corporate ladder in commercial real estate and hospitality management. I made strategic moves, took calculated risks, and by 26, I'd made my first million. By 27, I'd made 5 more. I didn't tell my family. Why would I? They'd never asked. They'd never been interested in my little office job in Chicago. They assumed I was a mid-level manager somewhere, scraping by, too focused on work to find a husband. They had no idea I'd spent the last 2 years quietly acquiring companies. Small at first, a hotel chain here, a commercial property group there. Then bigger. Strategic. Building an empire while they forgot to invite me to Thanksgiving. The invitation came by mail, not even a phone call. Cream cardstock, embossed letters. You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Claire Elizabeth Carson and Bradley James Morrison. The party was at the Grandview Country Club in Charlotte, the same place where my parents had celebrated their 30th anniversary without me because I'd been too busy with work. I almost didn't go. I had board meetings, property acquisitions to close, a hotel renovation in Atlanta that needed my approval. But something made me book the flight. Maybe I wanted to try one more time. Maybe I was tired of being the ghost at my own family's table. I flew in on a Friday afternoon, drove my rental car to the country club, and walked into that ballroom wearing a simple black dress and pearl earrings. I'd lost weight from stress. My hair was pulled back. I looked tired, I'm sure, from running a multi-million-dollar operation no one knew existed. Claire was radiant in a white cocktail dress, showing off her ring, a massive diamond I recognized as coming from the jeweler my mother had always preferred. Bradley stood beside her, tall, confident, his arm around her waist. He worked for Morrison and Associates, a corporate consulting firm in Charlotte. I'd heard all about him during the few phone calls my mother bothered to make, his family's connections, his Yale education, his promising future. My mother saw me first. "Oh, Emma. You made it." Not a hug. Not excitement. Just mild surprise, like I was a distant cousin who'd driven in from out of state. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, and I meant it. They'd put me at table 12. In the back. Near the kitchen doors. I stood there staring at the seating chart, beautifully calligraphed on a gold easel, and felt something crack inside my chest. My own sister's engagement party, and I was seated with second cousins I'd met maybe twice and my mother's book club friends. Claire was at table 1, obviously. My parents at table 2. Aunts, uncles, close family friends at tables 3 through 6. The important people. The ones who mattered. Table 12 was where you put the obligatory invites. The people you had to include but didn't really want there. I found my seat. The woman next to me introduced herself as Donna, my mother's friend from the garden committee. She was kind, at least. Asked about my flight, my job. I gave vague answers. "I work in property management. Chicago, mostly." "Oh, how nice," she said, in that tone that meant how boring. From table 12, I watched my family celebrate. I watched Claire glow under the attention. I watched my mother make toasts about her beautiful baby girl without mentioning she had 2 daughters. I watched my father beam with pride as Bradley talked about his career prospects. And I watched Bradley's father, Richard Morrison, CEO of Morrison and Associates, hold court at table 3, talking loudly about business deals and golf handicaps. I recognized him. Of course I did. 6 months ago, my acquisition team had purchased the commercial property group that owned the building Morrison and Associates leased. We were their landlord now. They just didn't know it yet. The speeches started after dinner. My father went first, talking about Claire's accomplishments, her college graduation, her marketing job, how proud he was of the woman she'd become. He didn't mention me once. Then my mother. Then Bradley's parents. Then aunts and uncles, all telling stories about Claire, the golden child, the perfect daughter. I sat at table 12 and felt myself disappearing. That's when my Aunt Karen stood up, wine glass in hand, already tipsy. "I just want to say," she announced, her voice carrying across the room, "that I'm so glad Claire found someone successful. Someone with ambition." She paused, looked directly at me, and added, "Not everyone in this family is so lucky in their choices." The table laughed. It was a small laugh, uncomfortable, but it was there. I felt my face burning. Then Claire's maid of honor, her best friend Jessica, whom I'd known since we were kids, stood up for her toast. She talked about Claire's journey, her relationship with Bradley, how they were the power couple we all aspire to be. Then she added, looking around the room with a practiced smile, "Unlike some people who choose careers over family, Claire knows what really matters." More laughter. Louder this time. I gripped my napkin under the table. Comment if you've ever felt this kind of betrayal. When the people who should protect you are the ones holding the knife. Then Bradley stood up. He thanked everyone for coming, talked about how lucky he was to marry into such a wonderful family. Then he looked at Claire and said, "You're everything I've ever wanted. Beautiful, successful, from a family that understands what success really means." He paused, and I saw it coming before he said it. "You know, Claire's sister is here tonight, Emma, right?" She works in some office somewhere in Chicago. Very dedicated, I hear. But Claire has the whole package. Career, family, balance. She hasn't sacrificed what matters for some corporate ladder. The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then my cousin David laughed. Loud. Sharp. And the dam broke. Laughter rippled across the room. Not everyone, some people looked uncomfortable, but enough. Enough to make it clear what they all thought. That I was the cautionary tale. The older sister who'd chosen wrong. The woman who'd worked herself into loneliness while her younger sister got everything right. That's when Claire stood up, wine glass in hand, riding the wave of laughter and attention. She was drunk, I realized. Drunk on champagne and praise and being the center of everything. I love my sister, she said, her voice syrupy with false affection. I really do. But Emma's always been so focused on her little job, her little apartment, her little life. And I just hope someday she finds what really matters. Like I have. She raised her glass toward me, a toast that felt like a slap. That's when someone knocked over the crystal flute. It shattered. The sound cut through the laughter like a gunshot. And in the sudden silence, Claire said those words I'll never forget, at least my fiancé has a real career. Not like Emma, playing dress-up in her little office. The laughter that followed was loud enough to drown out my heartbeat. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. I stood up from table 12, picked up my purse, and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. My mother looked away. My father was busy talking to Richard Morrison. Claire was accepting congratulations from a cluster of cousins. I made it to the parking lot before I let myself feel it. The rage. The humiliation. The bone-deep exhaustion of trying to earn love from people who would never see me. I sat in my rental car and pulled out my phone. I opened my email, the encrypted one connected to my business operations. I scrolled through recent acquisitions, property holdings, financial reports. And I started to laugh. Not a happy laugh. A dark, bitter sound that scared me a little. They had no idea. None of them. They thought I was playing dress-up in a little office, scraping by on a manager's salary, too pathetic to find a husband or build a real life. They didn't know I owned 43 properties across the United States. They didn't know my net worth was north of $50 million. They didn't know that 6 months ago, my holding company had acquired the commercial real estate group that owned half the buildings in downtown Charlotte, including the one where Bradley's father ran Morrison and Associates. And they definitely didn't know that 3 weeks ago, I'd closed the deal on the Grandview Country Club Hotel Group, which included the resort where Claire was planning her dream wedding. I owned the company Bradley's father worked for, indirectly through property holdings and lease agreements. I owned the hotel where Claire was getting married in 6 months. And they'd just humiliated me in front of 75 people. I started the car. Drove to my hotel, not the Grandview property. I stayed at a Hilton downtown, anonymous and quiet. I ordered room service and opened my laptop. It was time to stop being invisible. Tap like so this story reaches someone who needs it. Because sometimes you have to let them see who you really are. I spent the weekend in that hotel room doing research. Morrison and Associates leased the 14th floor of the Redmond Tower, one of 15 commercial properties my company had acquired through a subsidiary deal. I pulled the lease agreement. They were paying below market rates, locked into a 10-year contract that was up for renewal in 4 months. Claire's wedding was booked at the Grandview Estate Resort, a luxury property in the mountains outside Asheville, North Carolina. It had been part of the Grandview Hotel Group acquisition. I was now the majority stakeholder. The wedding was scheduled for June 15th. I made calls. Quiet calls. I spoke with my property managers, my legal team, my CFO. I asked questions about lease renewals, contract terms, booking policies, cancellation clauses. I wasn't planning revenge. Not exactly. I was planning truth. They wanted to treat me like I was nothing? Fine. But they were going to find out exactly who I was. And they were going to learn it at the worst possible moment. 6 weeks after the engagement party, Richard Morrison received a letter from his building's new property management company, informing him that his lease was up for renewal and the terms had changed. The new rate was market standard. 40% higher than what he'd been paying. He could accept the new terms, or he could move his entire operation to a new building within 90 days. I didn't deliver the letter personally. I had property managers for that. But I made sure the timing was perfect, right when Morrison and Associates was in the middle of pitching a major contract to a Fortune 500 client. Moving offices would be catastrophic. I heard through my network that Richard was furious. That he'd called his real estate contacts trying to find out who owned the building now, trying to negotiate. But the ownership was buried under layers of LLCs and holding companies. He'd never trace it back to me. The deadline to accept the new lease terms was May 1st. 2 weeks before Claire's wedding preparations went into full swing. In April, the Grandview Estate Resort underwent what we called a routine booking review. It was standard procedure after an acquisition. We examined all existing reservations, verified deposits, ensured everything was in order for the transition to new management. Claire's wedding was flagged for review. Not because of me, at least, not officially. It was flagged because of the payment schedule. The deposit had been made, but there were outstanding balances for catering, the rehearsal dinner, room blocks for guests. Standard stuff, but it needed to be confirmed. My events manager at the resort, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd been there for 15 years, called Claire to verify details. Claire was dismissive, apparently. Told Patricia that everything was obviously fine and that she didn't have time to deal with administrative nonsense. She'd pay the balances closer to the date. Patricia noted the interaction in the file and sent it up the chain for review. The file landed on my desk. I read through the booking details. The ceremony location, the rose garden overlooking the mountains. The reception in the grand ballroom. The rehearsal dinner on the terrace. Room blocks for 70 guests. Total cost, nearly $200,000, most of it being paid by my parents. I looked at the payment schedule. The deposit was refundable up until 60 days before the wedding. After that, cancellations forfeited the full amount. I checked the calendar. We were 93 days out. I made a note in the file and sent it back to Patricia with instructions, everything by the book. Confirm all payments by the required deadlines. No exceptions, no flexibility. Standard corporate policy for all events. Then I made a phone call to my parents' house. My mother answered. "Hi, Mom." "Emma?" She sounded surprised. We hadn't spoken since the engagement party. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I just wanted to check in about the wedding. I know it's coming up soon, and I wanted to make sure I had the right details." "June 15th at the Grandview Estate Resort, right?" "Yes, that's right." Her tone was cautious. Are you planning to attend? Of course, I said. I wouldn't miss it. There was a pause. Well, that's good. Claire will be happy to hear it. We talked for another minute, surface level, polite, cold. Then I hung up. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window of my Chicago office. The city sprawled below me, glittering in the spring sunlight. They still had no idea who I was. Subscribe for more stories like this one. Because the truth always comes out, it's just a matter of timing. In early May, Richard Morrison accepted the new lease terms for the Redmond Tower. He didn't have a choice. His company was locked into contracts, and moving would cost more than just paying the increased rent. But he wasn't happy about it. I heard through business channels that he was furious. That he'd ranted to colleagues about corporate vultures and greedy property investors who were bleeding small businesses dry. It was ironic, considering Morrison and Associates had spent years charging premium rates for consulting services while benefiting from below-market rent. But I didn't point that out. The same week, Claire called the Grandview Estate Resort in a panic. She'd received an automated reminder that the next payment was due 30 days before the wedding, as specified in the contract. She called Patricia directly, demanding to know why she was being harassed about payments when everything was already arranged. Patricia calmly explained that the policy had been in place all along, clearly outlined in the contract Claire had signed when she booked the venue. Claire insisted there must be a mistake. That she'd been working with the previous manager, that they'd had an understanding. Patricia put her on hold and called me. "We have a situation," she said. I listened to the recording of Claire's call. Heard the entitlement in her voice, the assumption that rules didn't apply to her. "Follow the contract," I told Patricia. "No exceptions. If the payment isn't made by the deadline, we initiate standard cancellation procedures." Understood. I hung up and went back to work. My mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Emma, I need to ask you something." I was in a meeting, but I stepped out. "What's wrong?" "Claire's wedding venue, they're being difficult about payments. She's very upset. I know you work in hotels or property management or whatever. Do you have any contacts who could help? Maybe make a call, smooth things over?" I stood in the hallway of my office building, looking out at Lake Michigan. "Mom," I said slowly. "What exactly do you want me to do?" "Just talk to someone. You must know people in the industry. The resort is being unreasonable, insisting on payments ahead of schedule." "What resort?" "The Grandview Estate. In Asheville. It's beautiful, Emma, you'd love it. Very elegant. But their new management is being difficult about payment schedules that were never an issue before." "The Grandview Estate," I repeated. "Yes. Can you help?" I could have told her right then. I could have said the words, "Mom, I own that hotel. I own the whole chain. And Claire is being asked to follow the same policies as every other client." But I didn't. "I'll see what I can do," I said. "Oh, thank you, sweetheart. I knew we could count on you." Sweetheart. The word felt like glass in my ears. I went back to my meeting. Afterward, I called Patricia. "Has the payment come through for the Carson wedding?" "No, ma'am. We're now 5 days past the deadline. I've sent 2 reminders. No response. Send a final notice. 72 hours to comply with the contract terms, or we proceed with cancellation as outlined in the booking agreement." "Are you sure?" Patricia asked carefully. Given the amount of money involved, they might request a meeting with upper management. They can request whatever they want. The contract is the contract. I hung up and tried to feel something other than cold satisfaction. I couldn't. Claire called me 3 days later. I was in my apartment in Chicago, drinking wine and watching the sun set over the lake, when my phone buzzed. Her name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Emma. Her voice was tight. I need your help. What's wrong? The hotel. The Grandview Estate. They're threatening to cancel my wedding. Why would they do that? I don't know. Some ridiculous payment thing. They're saying I haven't paid the balance, but I told them I'd pay closer to the date. Everyone does that. But now they're saying if I don't pay by tomorrow, they're canceling the entire booking. Did you read the contract when you signed it? Silence. Claire? Of course I read it, she snapped. But this is insane. They can't just cancel. We have 70 guests coming. We've sent invitations. Everything is planned. Maybe you should pay them. It's $200,000, Emma. Do you know how much money that is? We don't have that just sitting around. I almost laughed. $200,000. I'd spent more than that on a single property acquisition last month. What did Mom and Dad say? They're furious. They're trying to negotiate, but the hotel won't budge. Mom said you were going to help, that you had contacts in the industry. I looked into it, I said. There's nothing I can do. They're following their contract. Nothing you can do? Her voice rose. You work in hotels. You said you'd help. I work in property management, Claire. I don't have magic powers. If you signed a contract and didn't follow the terms, that's on you. Wow. The word was sharp. Thanks for nothing. Again. She hung up. I sat there with my wine glass, looking at the darkening sky, and felt something twist in my chest. This was it. The moment everything changed. If you're still with me, drop a comment letting me know. Because this is where the truth finally comes out. The call came on a Friday morning. My mother. Her voice was shaking. Emma, I need you to tell me something. I was at my desk, reviewing acquisition reports. What? Do you own the Grandview Estate Resort? The words hung in the air. What? Do you own it? Her voice cracked. Claire called the hotel this morning to make the payment. She was transferred to the ownership group for some reason, and when she asked who owned the property, they said it was held by Carson Holdings, LLC. Emma, your last name is Carson. Is it yours? I set down my coffee. Yes. Silence. Long and terrible. You own the hotel where your sister is getting married. I own 43 properties across the United States, Emma. The Grandview Estate Group was acquired 8 months ago as part of a larger portfolio deal. It's one of many. And you didn't tell us. You never asked. You never asked what I do, what I've built, who I am. You assumed I worked in some tiny office, scraping by, failing at life. So yes, I didn't tell you. Emma. Do you know what else I own? I was standing now, pacing my office. I own the property group that leases the building to Morrison and Associates. Bradley's father's company. I'm the reason his rent went up 40%. I'm the reason they're struggling to make their numbers this quarter. Oh my God. You put me at table 12, I said, and my voice broke. At my own sister's engagement party, you put me in the back with strangers. You let them humiliate me. You laughed. You stood there and laughed while your daughter told 75 people that I was playing dress-up in my little office. Emma, we didn't know. That's the problem. I was shouting now. You didn't know because you never cared to know. You never asked. You just assumed I was the failure, the disappointment, the sister who didn't measure up. Silence. Then, what are you going to do? About the wedding? Nothing. The contract is clear. If Claire makes the payment by the deadline, the wedding proceeds as planned. If she doesn't, the booking is cancelled and the deposit is forfeited. Standard policy for every client, including family. Emma, please. I'll be there, I said. For the wedding, if it happens. I'll be there, and I'll sit wherever you put me, and I'll watch everyone celebrate the golden child. But they're all going to know the truth now. About who I am. What I've built. And how wrong you all were. I hung up. They paid. Of course they paid. $200,000 wired to the resort account at 4:47 p.m. on the deadline day. I saw the transaction record. My father had liquidated investments to cover it. The wedding proceeded as planned. June 15th arrived, bright and perfect. I flew into Asheville, rented a car, and drove to the Grandview Estate Resort, my property, carrying a gift and wearing a designer dress that cost more than Claire's wedding gown. The ceremony was in the Rose Garden. I arrived early, parked in the executive lot, and walked through the lobby. The staff recognized me. I was the owner, after all, though most had only seen me in video conferences. Patricia greeted me personally, discreet and professional. Everything is in order, Ms. Carson. Thank you, Patricia. I walked to the ceremony site. The chairs were filling up. I looked for my name on the seating chart. Table 7. Closer to the front this time. Not with the family, but not in the back with the obligatory invites. I took my seat and watched the guests arrive. My parents looked older. Strained. My father avoided eye contact. My mother looked at me once, her face unreadable, then looked away. Aunts and uncles whispered as they passed. Cousins stared. The story had spread, of course. Everyone knew now. Emma, the invisible sister, owned the resort. Owned property across the country. Was worth more than everyone in the room combined. The music started. Claire appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her white gown, and I felt something complicated twist in my chest. She was still my sister. Still the girl I'd grown up with, even if she'd never seen me clearly. The ceremony was beautiful. Traditional. Claire and Bradley said their vows, exchanged rings, kissed to applause and cheers. The reception was in the grand ballroom, a space I'd personally approved for renovation, though Claire didn't know that. The decor was elegant, the food exceptional, the band was flawless. I sat at table 7 and watched my family celebrate. Bradley's father was there, looking uncomfortable. He knew who I was now. Knew I was the reason his company's overhead had increased. He didn't approach me. My Aunt Karen avoided me entirely. Claire's maid of honor Jessica gave me a nervous smile when we passed in the hallway. If you've made it this far, you know how this ends. But stay with me, because this is the moment that matters most. Dinner was served. Speeches began. My father stood, glass in hand, and talked about Claire's childhood, her accomplishments, how proud he was to see her marry such a fine young man. He still didn't mention me. Bradley's father gave a brief, awkward toast about family and partnership. Then the best man, then the maid of honor. Then Claire stood up, microphone in hand, her face flushed from champagne and happiness. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she said. "This day has been perfect. Absolutely perfect. And I know there's been some." She paused, glancing toward me. "Some confusion lately. But family is family, and I'm glad everyone could make it." It was the closest she'd come to acknowledging what had happened. What she'd said at the engagement party. What they'd all learned about me in the weeks since. She raised her glass. "To family." "To family," the room echoed. I raised my glass and drank. Then I stood up. The room went quiet. I walked to the front of the ballroom. Claire watched me approach, her expression uncertain. I took the microphone from her hand gently. "I'd like to say something," I said. My mother looked like she might faint. 6 months ago, at Claire's engagement party, I sat at table 12 and listened to this family tell me who I was. A failure. A woman who'd chosen wrong. Someone who'd sacrificed what mattered for a job that didn't matter. You could hear glasses being set down. The silence was total. I didn't correct you. I didn't defend myself. I left quietly, and I let you believe what you wanted to believe. I looked at Claire. She was frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. But the truth is this: I've spent the last 6 years building something I'm proud of. I own properties across this country. I run companies. I employ hundreds of people. I've built a life that matters to me, even if it doesn't look like what you wanted for me. I turned to face the full room. This resort, this beautiful place where we're celebrating today, is one of 43 properties I own. The building where Bradley's father works? I own that too. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying it because I need you all to understand something. I looked at my parents. Success doesn't look the same for everyone. And love, a real love, means seeing people for who they are, not who you want them to be. I handed the microphone back to Claire. "Congratulations on your wedding, Claire. I mean that. I hope you're happy." I walked back to table 7. The room stayed silent for another beat, then the band started playing again, filling the awkward void. I sat down and finished my wine. My mother found me on the terrace an hour later. "Emma." I turned. She looked small, somehow. Older. "Can we talk?" Of course. We stood there in the mountain air, the party continuing inside, music drifting through the open doors. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what, specifically?" She flinched. "For not seeing you. For treating you like you didn't matter. For letting Claire, for letting all of us, humiliate you." I looked out at the mountains, dark shapes against the sunset sky. "I spent my whole life trying to earn your attention," I said quietly. "Your pride. Your love. And I realized, sitting at table 12 6 months ago, that I was never going to get it. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because you'd already decided who I was supposed to be, and I wasn't that person." "That's not true." "It is, Mom. You wanted me to be like Claire. Social, bubbly, focused on family and relationships and all the things you valued. But I'm not Claire. I never was. And instead of loving me for who I am, you treated me like a disappointment." She was crying now. "I didn't know about your business, your success. If I'd known." "That's the problem," I said. "It shouldn't have mattered. You should have loved me when you thought I was just a mid-level manager scraping by. You should have been proud of me for working hard, for building a life I cared about, even if it didn't look like what you wanted. That's what love is." We stood in silence. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Maybe. Eventually. But things are going to be different now. I'm not going to keep trying to earn something I should have had from the beginning." She nodded. "I understand." We went back inside together. I left the next morning before anyone else was awake. I drove through the mountains as the sun rose, thinking about everything that had happened. The humiliation. The revelation. The look on Claire's face when I'd taken that microphone. Part of me felt vindicated. They knew now. They all knew who Emma Carson really was. But another part of me felt empty. Because the truth was, I hadn't done this for revenge. I'd done it because I needed them to see me. And even now, I wasn't sure they really did. My phone buzzed as I reached the highway. A text from Claire. "Can we talk? Just us?" I pulled over at a rest stop and called her. "Hey," she said. She sounded tired. "Hey. I'm sorry. For what I said at the engagement party. For everything." I closed my eyes. "Why did you say it, Claire?" "I don't know. I was drunk. I was showing off. I wanted everyone to think I had my life together, and making fun of you made me feel, I don't know, better about myself. You made me feel invisible." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I know, and I'm so sorry. You're my sister. You're supposed to be the one person I protect, and instead I tore you down. In front of everyone." We sat in silence for a moment. "I don't know how to fix this," I said. "Me neither. But I want to try. If you'll let me." I watched trucks roll past on the highway, carrying goods and people and lives I'd never know. "Okay," I said. "We can try." It's been 6 months since Claire's wedding. Things are different now. Not perfect, family wounds take time to heal, but different. My parents and I have dinner once a month. Video calls, usually, since I'm still based in Chicago, but real conversations. My father asks about my business now. My mother listens, actually listens, when I talk about acquisitions and renovations and the challenges of running a multi-state operation. Claire and I text most weeks. She's working on herself, she says. Going to therapy. Learning to be less competitive, less desperate for validation. Her marriage is good, she tells me. Bradley is kind to her in ways she's learning to recognize and value. I'm not sure we'll ever be as close as sisters should be, but we're trying. As for me, I'm still building. Still growing my empire. But I'm also learning to build other things, friendships, a social life, connections that aren't just about business. I'm learning that success isn't just about net worth or property holdings. It's about being seen. Being valued. Being loved for who you are, not who people want you to be. And I'm learning that sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living your truth and refusing to be small anymore. Here's what I want you to take from this story: your worth isn't determined by whether people see it. Your success doesn't require validation from people who never bothered to know you. Build your life for yourself, not for their applause. And when they finally see who you are, let them. But don't let their blindness define you. You were always worthy, even when they couldn't see it. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment about a time you felt invisible. Let's remind each other that we're not alone in this. And subscribe, because everyone deserves to be seen. They mocked me at my sister's engagement. They learned who I really was at her wedding. And in the end, that was enough.